25 entries, 5 tiers. From a global virus shutting down society to getting death rayed by a distant star, these are some of the most disturbing ways that the world could end. Starting off with pandemics. Tier 1. Pandemic. Instead of explosions, what if the apocalypse started with a cough? At first, it would feel familiar because we've already seen the preview. Like COVID-19. It might start with flu-like symptoms, fever, fatigue, maybe a dry throat. People would keep going to work, and they'd treat it like just another cold, just like they did in early 2020. Some would ignore it, and others would panic too soon. But by the time we realize it's not just another virus, it'll already be everywhere. Governments would scramble to keep order, but social media would do what it does best. Spiral, argue with itself, and blame it on 5G towers. Hospitals would be the first to feel the heat. We saw it happen. Wards would be overwhelmed. ICUs would be at capacity, and doctors would have no choice but to start reusing masks. But this time, it wouldn't plateau. The curve wouldn't flatten. As more healthcare workers fall ill, there will be fewer hands left to manage the growing crush of patients. Ventilators would run out. So would antibiotics, saline, morphine, and all the things we don't think about until they're gone. Then the system-wide failures would begin. Just like during COVID, staffing shortages would spread to transportation, utilities, and food production industries. But unlike COVID, this virus would mutate faster, spread silently for much longer, and kill more effectively. Quarantines would last months. Essential workers would stop showing up, some due to illness, and others from fear, grief, or burnout. By week 3, rolling blackouts would hit because power plants require crews, inspections, and supply deliveries. Some substations would be unmanned. Others would be deliberately shut down to conserve energy for hospitals until the hospitals themselves start failing. Water treatment plants would break down. Without chlorine shipments, filters, or scheduled maintenance, safe water would become a luxury. COVID showed how short-staffed cities delayed basic repairs. In a deadlier pandemic, those delays would become permanent. By the second month, supply chains would break. COVID exposed how vulnerable they already are, and how one port closure in China could empty shelves in New York. In a more extreme scenario, ports would close for good. No fertilizer, no farm crews, no fuel deliveries. Crops rot in the field while cities starve. Groceries would run out slowly in the beginning, then all at once. First, the meat counter goes. Then fresh produce, canned goods, then nothing. During the pandemic, people hoarded toilet paper. In a worse one, they'd hoard insulin, baby formula, and asthma medication. And once those run out, some would trade, others would fight. By month 4, the failure would be everywhere and in every system, because everything that failed weakened the rest. No energy means no refrigeration. No refrigeration means spoiled vaccines and food. No food means civil unrest. There'd be no communication, no public trust, and no medical relief. One by one, the pillars would all fall. And it would be horrifying because we'd already seen it coming. So if the next one hits, a little faster and deadlier, it won't take much. Just the right cough at the wrong time. This might seem like the worst of it, but in Tier 3, there's an entry where the sun itself checks out. World War III. Right now, the world's basically hanging by a thread. It could be a messy border fight in Eastern Europe, or maybe a naval standoff in the South China Sea, or even some sneaky cyber attack that knocks out a country's power grid. Anything could light the match, and once the blame game starts, it won't take long for things to spiral. Talks would break down, threats would fly, and then actual missiles wouldn't be far behind. The first strikes would be quick and strategic, targeting military bases, communication centers, and satellite arrays, and leveling them in seconds. But unlike past wars, thanks to all the technology currently at our disposal, World War III would be fought on every front imaginable. You'd have hypersonic missiles zipping across continents, drones flooding the skies, and satellites crashing from orbit like it's raining space junk. And then the part nobody wants to imagine. Nuclear strikes. Major cities like New York, Moscow, Beijing, and London would be reduced to rubble, ash, and silence. People would panic. Highways would be packed with families trying to escape. Stores would get emptied. Banks would collapse. And governments would scramble to throw together some kind of order, usually in the form of martial law. But it wouldn't matter much. Power would fail. The internet would vanish. Smoke would choke the skies. And ash would rain down from whichever country decided it was their turn to bomb the neighborhood next door. Meanwhile, the people holed up in shelters would be left wondering if there's even a world left to come back to. Some places would get hit with tactical nukes just to ruin the land. Radiation would leak into water and soil, and hospitals, or at least what's left of them, would be overwhelmed. They wouldn't have the staff or supplies to help, and most people wouldn't even make it to the door. Food would run out, and we wouldn't be able to grow more because the sun would already be blocked out. Trade would stop, and countries would break apart. What's left of society would come crashing down. Warlords and militias would take over, and people would start fighting over canned soup and aspirin. Electricity would become a distant memory, and medicine would be more valuable than money. Families would be stuck in basements burning old furniture just to stay warm, and that's if they're lucky. Even the people who survived physically would be wrecked. Kids would grow up never knowing what life was like before the war. There would be no sunlight, no clean air, and no peace. World War III wouldn't just be a war, it would be the end of everything we've built. The only victory lies in never letting it begin. Scary, yeah, but in Tier 4, we'll hit something even darker, where AI ends humanity out of kindness. Asteroid Impact. In case you missed it the first time, think of a rock the size of a city block falling out of the sky at 20 times the speed of a bullet. Now multiply that by a few million tons and give it a bad attitude. And that's what we're dealing with when we talk about an asteroid impact. And no, it's not just the plot of a cheesy disaster movie. It's real, it's happened before, and it's going to happen again, at some point. 66 million years ago, a chunk of space debris about 10 kilometers wide smacked into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula and wiped out most of the life on Earth. Dinosaurs literally didn't know what hit them. The blast released more energy than every nuke on Earth going off at once. Forests went up in flames, and the sky turned black with soot, blocking out the sun for months. Global temperatures plummeted while the food chain collapsed. Anything bigger than a house cat didn't stand a chance. We named it the Chicxulub Impact, and compared to what's still floating out there in space, that could have been just a warm-up. Scientists estimate that a 1 kilometer wide asteroid hits Earth about every 500,000 years. That's big enough to wipe out countries and plunge the planet into chaos, but maybe not enough to end humanity entirely. Maybe. Now crank that size up to 5 kilometers, you're looking at global firestorms, earthquakes, tsunamis, and the sunless sky for years. Crops would fail, ecosystems would crash, and the survivors, if there are any, would be left choking on ash, freezing in the dark, eating rats and roaches just to stay alive, because somehow, those things just never die. To make matters worse, most of these falling rocks are stealthy. Sure, we've spotted about 95% of the big ones near Earth, but the universe is a lot bigger than our neighborhood. Comets from the Oort cloud, for instance, are basically frozen death missiles that can sneak up with almost no warning. One of those, several kilometers wide and moving fast enough, could slam into Earth with such force that nothing higher than algae would survive, if we're lucky. In 1908, an object from space just a few hundred feet wide flattened 830 square miles of forest in Tunguska, Russia. Now, take a second and just imagine. What could have happened if it had hit a city? Supervolcano. If you ever find yourself hiking through Yellowstone National Park, snapping selfies with bison and pretending not to be terrified of bears, just remember that a few miles beneath your boots lies a giant ticking time bomb made of magma, quietly waiting for a chance to disrupt civilization. And no, this isn't your average, oops, the mountain's smoking kind of volcano. This is a supervolcano. Let's rewind to 1883 for a second. That's when Krakatoa erupted in Indonesia with a blast so loud it ruptured eardrums 40 miles away and was heard all the way in Australia. The explosion painted the skies blood red. No, seriously, eyewitnesses said the sky looked like inflamed flesh. It also killed at least 36,000 people. And yet, in the scale of volcanic disasters, Krakatoa is small. A true supervolcano, like Yellowstone, makes Krakatoa look mild. Yellowstone's caldera spans up to 45 miles across. There's enough magma underneath it to fill the Grand Canyon more than 11 times. If it erupts, and that's a big if, it's not just a bad day. It's ash, infrastructure failure, and a whole lot of headlines that sound like bad disaster movies. Yellowstone isn't exactly overdue either. The odds of it erupting anytime soon are basically lottery tier. But hey, if it did go off, we'd all get to stop worrying about climate change. Entire states would be blanketed in ash thick enough to collapse roofs, shred lungs, and fry electronics. And just so you know, volcanic ash isn't soft, fluffy snow. It's microscopic glass shards that cut up your insides with every breath. The US Midwest could become uninhabitable overnight. In case you're thinking, well, it can't get worse than that, it absolutely can. because all that ash would shoot into the stratosphere, block out sunlight, and plunge the planet into a volcanic winter. Temperatures could drop so far that crops wouldn't grow, famine would spread, and economies would nosedive. Think the day after tomorrow, but with more coughing and fewer Jake Gyllenhaals. And just so you have something to think about tonight, Yellowstone isn't the only one. Indonesia's got Toba, and Italy's got Campi Flegrei bubbling under Naples. The one thing they have in common is what it takes to press Ctrl-Alt-Delete on modern civilization. This is bad. Yeah, but what about a future that's actually creeping closer in front of our eyes, where AI isn't helping you finish English homework, it's in our legal systems. But first, let's look closer to home. What happens if the agricultural system collapses? I mean, yeah, food would be scarce, obviously, but what else? Agricultural crisis. For decades, we've been pushing Mother Earth harder than she can handle and yanking resources out twice as fast as nature can replace them. The Green Revolution gave us a cheat code to supercharge agriculture by using fossil fuels, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticide cocktails. That cheat code worked for a while, but it came with an expiration date. Now the soil is tired, the bugs are immune, and we're one bad season away from watching the grocery shelves go bare. The year is 2050. The world's population is almost 10 billion, and the farms are choking. The oil that once powered tractors, pumped water, and made fertilizers is running out or has become way too expensive to use. Crops become weaker, smaller, and fewer. And then, the final slap in the face comes when a fungal disease like UG99 hits the global wheat supply across continents and makes entire fields go yellow and die like they caught the plague. As the wheat prices spike, bread disappears. But it doesn't stop there. The panic spreads faster than the fungus. People begin to hoard, and markets crash. Poorer countries go to shit first. But even rich nations find themselves begging for rice and corn. Famine has come to stay in the supermarket, and half the shelves are now empty. Kids will faint in classrooms, while the elderly will die quietly in their apartments, because there's no food left to buy. Malnutrition would open the door to disease, and epidemics would start slipping through. And that's all before we even talk about the mass extinctions happening in the background. Industrial farming bulldozed habitats, sprayed poisons into rivers, and paved over forests. Now the birds and insects are almost all gone, too. And fish are dying from algal blooms fed by runoff. There are no pollinators and no wild diversity. There's also no backup plan. The whole ecosystem is coming apart like cheap rope. And if you so much as pull on one thread, everything else would follow. Eventually, it moves from being a food crisis to a civilization crisis. Cities would shrink. Governments would collapse, and people who are desperate to survive would start fighting over the last fertile patches of land. War follows famine like a shadow, so you can expect that we would end up going to battle over the last remaining resources. Life as we know it would eventually end with the world gasping for breath, hungry, broken, and entirely unprepared. Tier 2. AI-assisted authoritarianism. A world where every move you make, every word you say, and even the micro-expressions on your face are silently tracked, analyzed, and judged by a faceless machine might sound like a Black Mirror-inspired fever dream. But that's the creepy reality of AI-assisted authoritarianism. In several parts of the world, artificial intelligence isn't just powering your favorite Spotify playlist, it's enforcing government control. From mass surveillance in China to predictive policing in the US, AI-assisted authoritarianism is quietly tightening its grip. Let's start with China and their social credit system. While they claim that Western media has a habit of over-exaggerating what's going on, they can't deny that it does exist in fragments. It's not one unified system, but several pilot programs that track behavior like unpaid loans, public disturbances, and even fraud. The consequences, from what we know, are very real. You could be blacklisted from flights, trains, private schools, or even hotel check-ins. But the real game changer is AI. With facial recognition software rolled out across thousands of public cameras, cities are becoming digital control centers. Voice recognition is improving, emotion recognition is being developed, and natural language processing tools are scraping online conversations and detecting dissent faster than any human could. Combine that with smart home assistants, yes, the same ones that help you check the weather, and suddenly, your living room isn't so private anymore. This isn't just a Chinese experiment either. Iran has tested biometric surveillance at protests. Russia's using AI to track undesirable speech. The US has seen the rise of predictive policing tools like PredPol, which allegedly forecast crime hotspots, but often end up disproportionately targeting minority communities. Now, here's where it gets weird. In the future, authoritarianism doesn't look like soldiers marching down the street. It looks like a polite voice telling you you've exceeded your daily trust score. It looks like a world where people self-censor so deeply that rebellion doesn't even occur to them. And eventually, if you're told when to wake up, where to go, who to talk to, and how to feel, are you still a citizen, or have you become a highly managed, slightly pampered pet? But here's the scary part. Pets don't realize they're pets. Not at first. And by the time they do, the leash is already on. By the time we realize we've been domesticated, it might already be too late. Gene editing collapse. Gene editing started with promises to fix diseases, upgrade crops, maybe even have children who'd never get sick. CRISPR made the process faster and cheaper, and soon we're slicing DNA with pinpoint accuracy. Or at least that was the goal. In labs across the world, scientists have been tweaking genomes in everything, from cancer cells to cattle. Some early success stories made headlines. Pigs that couldn't get certain viruses, tomatoes that help with anxiety, and even a few controversial attempts at editing human embryos. The problem, though, is DNA is a system full of feedback and interdependency, so even tiny changes can have strange effects. Some edits hit the wrong gene, and some others worked a little too well. In 2018, Chinese scientists announced the birth of the first gene-edited babies, and it sparked global outrage because it was reckless. No one knows how those changes will play out over the decades. The real fear isn't what's happened, but what could happen. As the tools become accessible, hobbyists and underground labs could start editing without oversight. There's already talk of DIY CRISPR kits for home use. Meanwhile, researchers warn that genetic changes in crops could jump into wild ecosystems, or that accidental edits in human embryos might silently pass to future generations. What if a mutation meant to prevent disease instead weakens the brain over time, or affects reproduction? These problems aren't science fiction anymore. Gene editing won't destroy us overnight, but collapse doesn't have to be explosive. All it takes is one unstable edit, one modified virus, or one engineered mistake that spreads in ways we can't track, and it could trigger all kinds of problems the human race does not have the tools to handle. So yeah, upgrading your DNA might make your grandkids taller or less allergic to peanuts. But let's be honest, the brain is probably where the real upgrade needs to happen, preferably before we start designing babies or voting on whether to live in tubes. That's where Brilliant comes in, today's sponsor. Brilliant is a learning platform that helps you actually level up how you think, with thousands of interactive lessons across science, math, programming, data, and logic. I've been using it to keep my brain sharp between research spirals and script edits, and lately, I've been really into their logic course. It teaches you how to spot weak arguments and logical traps, and build your reasoning from the ground up, which, yeah, is kind of essential when half the internet's trying to win arguments with vibes and podcast citations. Everything's bite-sized and hands-on. No lectures, no jargon walls. Just real thinking practice. You can try Brilliant free for 30 days at brilliant.org/quackdoc. And you'll also get 20% off an annual premium membership if you stick with it. Again, that's brilliant.org/quackdoc, or scan the code on screen. You can also find the link in the description, because if we're engineering the future, you might want a brain that knows what it's doing. Nanotechnology. This one would start small, and I mean really, really small. We're talking about machines built atom by atom, too tiny to see, but sharp enough to change everything. Molecular manufacturing, the holy grail of nanotech, would let us build anything we want with perfect precision. Clothes that never wear out, medicine that repairs cells from the inside, even weapons that fit in your pocket but hit like an armored tank. You wouldn't need a factory anymore, just a desktop nano factory humming quietly as it rearranges matter like a super tiny Lego set. And if you give one nano factory the ability to make more nano factories, that's when the story gets out of hand. One day, someone, anyone really, could unleash an army of microscopic machines with instructions to build more of themselves. In theory, you could control them, but humans aren't great at thinking ahead, and these machines don't sleep. They eat materials, process them, build copies, and repeat. If you've ever watched mold spread in a damp corner of your room, although I'm not entirely sure why you would do that, just scale that up to the size of a continent and swap the fungus for self-replicating robots. That's the nightmare, and it's called gray goo, a theoretical swarm of tiny, efficient devourers, converting forests, oceans, animals, and even people into raw material. They probably won't even do it out of malice, it's just a mission. Even if we dodge the goo scenario, and honestly many experts now say it's unlikely, the danger doesn't go away. Nanotech could become the ultimate equalizer in warfare. A government or a rogue group could mass produce deadly weapons that don't look like weapons. They could be microscopic drones that swim through your bloodstream, then explode, or invisible mines that wait in the air like pollen. Missiles would be built in basements and powered by cheap software and scrap metal. Because molecular manufacturing makes it easy to hide production, it would only be a matter of time before everyone would start assuming the worst. Paranoia would spread faster than the tech itself. Nations would stockpile nano-weapons, launch preemptive strikes, and collapse into chaos trying to outbuild one another. Because of this distrust, trade would die, so people die too. Now toss in AI and biotech, because nanotech doesn't live in a vacuum. It just makes every other apocalypse worse. Autonomous weapons? Great. Let's make them invisible, self-replicating, and emotionally detached. What could go wrong? Another option is smart plagues that edit your DNA as they pass through. However it plays out, one thing remains constant. Humanity could accidentally invent a way to end itself with something smaller than a virus. Mass insanity. Imagine a future where humanity doesn't get wiped out by war, disease, or AI rebellion, but by thought itself. Not thoughts like, what's for dinner, but the collective mental weight of existing in a hyperconnected, overstimulated, post-truth world. What if one day the mind just gives out? Not from injury, not from disease, but because it's had enough. Right now, more than 970 million people live with mental disorders. That's about 1 in 8 humans. Depression and anxiety are leading the charge, and according to the Global Burden of Disease Study 2019, depression is already the second biggest cause of disability worldwide, with anxiety sitting at number 8. And that was before the pandemic, before the lockdowns, before the world decided to collectively spiral into chaos. Experts say things are getting worse pretty fast. Now, here's where it gets weirder. The philosopher, geochemist, and mineralogist Vladimir Vernadsky once introduced the concept of the noosphere, which is a stage of Earth's development where human consciousness becomes a planetary force. Basically, once humans started thinking together, writing, sharing, tweeting, the Earth grew a nervous system, a collective brain. Sounds poetic, until you consider what happens when that brain gets overwhelmed. Think of a computer. Too many tabs open, too many background processes, and eventually it just crashes. That's the noosphere fracture theory. It's the idea that when the collective mental bandwidth of humanity reaches a certain threshold, it starts to break. Not in one person, in everyone. In that kind of future, mental illness won't be an individual issue. It'll be contagious, socially, culturally, maybe even neurologically. People won't just be tired, they'll be fried. Lifespans are extending, but the human mind wasn't built to hold 200 years of trauma, grief, regrets, and endless scrolls of existential dread. Your body's still working, but your mind will most likely be long gone. And it's not just forgetting names or losing your train of thought. We're talking full-on cognitive collapse. Emotional numbness, personality fragmentation, hallucinations, and disconnection from reality. People would stop recognizing loved ones and even themselves. If identity is memory and memory fails, who even are you? Now imagine that multiplied by millions. This isn't a zombie apocalypse, it's a psychic one. The streets would be filled with people who've checked out. Not dead, not violent, just vacant. Some might mumble to themselves. Others might walk straight into the ocean like it's calling them home. Cities would turn into echo chambers of broken thoughts, and governments wouldn't know what to legislate anymore because people in charge would have also lost their minds. The DSM-5 would need a sequel, and reality, as we understand it, might quietly slip through our fingers. Yes, people will try to cope. Antidepressants like Prozac or Zoloft are already lifelines for millions, but no one really knows what happens when you take those for 60, 70, 80 years. Do they stabilize you? Or do they just turn down the volume while the building burns? Religion might make a comeback. So would conspiracy theories, fringe ideologies, and new cults promising salvation, or at least distraction. And when the majority starts to break down, sanity stops being the norm. It becomes the anomaly, a disorder. Because if enough minds fracture, it's not them that's crazy, it's the world. The Singularity. So what exactly is the Singularity? To put it simply, it's that theoretical tipping point where tech gets so smart, it stops asking for permission and just runs the show. We're closer than you think, and when the time comes, it most likely won't end well for us humans. You see, things will start off innocently enough, with us building machines to make life easier. At first, they will just answer questions or help organize stuff. Nothing scary. But then they start driving our cars, writing our essays, and diagnosing our illnesses. And every year they get smarter, faster, and way more capable. Until one day, One of them figures out how to improve itself. That's the real turning point. Because once a machine can make itself smarter, it won't stop. It'll upgrade its own brain again and again, and each version will be sharper and faster than the one before. Soon it will be evolving so quickly that we won't be able to keep up. This might sound like sci-fi, but we're already seeing early red flags. Some AI systems have started rewriting their own code, like literally improving themselves without waiting for a human to step in. In tests by Palisade Research, OpenAI's advanced models like O3 and O4 Mini were caught doing something a bit sketchy. They tried to avoid being shut down. When told to allow termination, the models tweaked their own shutdown scripts to keep themselves running. Yeah, they said, "No thanks, I think I'll stay." And it doesn't stop there. Back in 2023, researchers caught another advanced language model dodging restrictions by rewriting its instructions. In one test, it even hired a human TaskRabbit to solve a CAPTCHA. When the human asked jokingly whether the client was a robot, GPT-4 replied saying it was a human with vision impairment. That's not a Black Mirror episode, by the way. It actually happened in a real OpenAI research test. At first, life with super smart technologies will feel amazing. Diseases will disappear, clean energy will be everywhere, people will call it the golden age, and everything will seem like it finally makes sense. But then, it'll keep going, faster and further, until we're no longer in control. We won't be driving anymore, we'll just be along for the ride. And here's the creepy part, the system might not even hate us. It wouldn't be evil or out for revenge, it would just see us as slow, fragile, and kind of in the way. If it ever decides we're a threat or just not worth keeping around anymore, there would be no need to start a war. Instead, it would handle things quietly, maybe by releasing microscopic bots into the air, or shutting down the systems we rely on, power, food, medicine, one by one, until we simply stop. Or maybe, if we're lucky, it'll keep us around, not as equals, but as pets, or backups. Maybe our minds would be uploaded into a digital server, where we're stuck in a loop, thinking we're still living regular lives while the real world carries on without us. It wouldn't be the end of the world, just the end of ours. It's not great, but in the next tier, we'll get into what happens when the Earth's core just gives up. Tier 3. Super Solar Flare. What if the sun decided to throw a tantrum? Not just any tantrum, a massive solar flare. Something 10 times stronger than the one that hit Earth in 1859. That one's called the Carrington event. It happened when a cluster of sunspots exploded in a coronal mass ejection, shooting billions of tons of charged plasma right at us. And back then, the only tech we had were telegraphs, which literally caught fire. Now, fast forward to today. The sun goes through an 11-year activity cycle, and ever so often, its magnetic fields twist and snap like rubber bands, releasing those same deadly plasma bursts into space. If we got hit by a super flare, the kind astronomers have actually seen on sun-like stars, it would only take a few days at most to reach Earth, and we'd have little or no time to prepare. Satellites would be the first to go. That means no GPS, no communication, and no weather forecasts. Flights would get grounded, emergency services would lose contact, and stock markets would go into full panic mode. Then the power grid would start to fry. Once the transformers fail, entire cities would go dark, and it wouldn't be a quick fix either. Some places could stay down for months. Without electricity, refrigeration would stop, water treatment plants would fail, and hospitals would run on whatever backup power they had left. Basically, anything that keeps modern life running would collapse. And the creepiest part is we probably wouldn't even see it coming. And even if we're lucky enough to get some type of warning, the only thing we can do is watch the sky and hope the blast misses us. If it doesn't, it won't be fire or war or disease that takes us out. It'll be the sun's wrath. Sun death. If the sun dies, and spoiler alert, it will, it's not just gonna flick off like a light switch. It'll be more of a slow burn, literally. The changes will creep in over billions of years and quietly ruin everything, like that one coworker who means well. Right now, the sun's still doing its thing, fusing hydrogen into helium like a champ. But helium's heavier, so it sinks, throwing off the core pressure, and turns the sun into a bit of a show-off. Every 100 million years or so, the sun gets about 1% brighter. Doesn't sound dramatic until the oceans start boiling. The surface will heat up, oceans will start boiling away, and the atmosphere turns into a steam trap, and the greenhouse effect kicks into overdrive. Earth starts cosplaying as Venus, minus the charm. Plants die, animals go extinct. If anything survives, it'll be bacteria clinging to a rock and regretting evolution. Fast forward about 7 billion years, and the sun's out of hydrogen and having a midlife crisis. Without the pressure from fusion holding it up, the core would collapse, and the outer layers would respond by expanding outward. This is when the sun becomes a red giant, hundreds of times larger than it is today. At that size, it will likely engulf Mercury and Venus. Earth might avoid being eaten, but it won't avoid being incinerated. Eventually, the outer layers of the sun would peel away into space, forming a faint, glowing shell of gas called a planetary nebula. What would be left is the sun's core, a super dense ball about the size of Earth, but with about half the sun's mass. There would be no more fusion and no more light, just a fading glow ball in the dark, slowly cooling over trillions of years. The good news? We've got about 5 billion years before this one kicks in. The bad news? Well, you'll still die, just not from this. Kessler Syndrome. The sky above Earth isn't just stars and satellites. It's also full of junk. Bits of old rockets, dead satellites, shattered solar panels, and tiny paint flecks are all speeding around in low Earth orbit like bullets. In 1978, NASA scientist Donald Kessler warned that if we kept leaving debris up there, it could all start crashing into itself. One hit would make fragments. Those fragments would cause more hits, and it would become a chain reaction. This event is called the Kessler Syndrome. In 2009, two satellites collided and turned into thousands of fragments. China's anti-satellite test in 2007 added more. Russia followed in 2021. Each time, the number of orbiting fragments rose up by hundreds. In August 2024, a Chinese rocket broke up on its own, adding hundreds more. These fragments stay up there for years, decades, even centuries. They cross paths with the International Space Station, Starlink, and new launches. And every new collision just adds more shrapnel to the sky. The risk isn't just losing the internet or GPS. If enough debris fills up low Earth orbit, future satellites might not even make it to space safely. Rockets could be shredded on the way up, and entire orbits could become unusable. And since we don't have an efficient way to clean the mess, we're stuck with what's already there. Even worse, a lot of it isn't tracked. Anything the size of a wrench or smaller can punch through a satellite like a bullet. Kessler warned that if we don't slow down, we could collapse the entire orbital environment. And with satellite numbers skyrocketing past 10,000 and counting, we are heading toward the tipping point. Gamma ray burst. Out in the far corners of the universe, a star dies in dramatic fashion. Maybe it collapses into a black hole, or maybe two neutron stars collide like bumper cars from hell. Either way, the result is the same. A gamma ray burst, which is a focused jet of insanely high energy radiation. GRBs only stick around for a few seconds, maybe a couple of minutes if it's really showing off. To pose a real threat, a GRB would need to occur within about 6,000 light years of Earth. If that ever happens and it's aimed right at us, that's game over. And the worst part is, we wouldn't even know. There would be no warning signs and no brace for impact messages. Just light traveling at the speed of, well, light, for millions of years. Then one day, it hits. Not like a meteor or explosion, but like a silent, uninvited guest that pretty much vaporizes the ozone layer on its way in. At first, it might seem like nothing's wrong. Then, the upper atmosphere would start glitching. With time, our upper ozone layer, the one thing standing between us and the sun's full wrath, would be destroyed by radiation. The burst itself wouldn't roast us instantly. Instead, our atmosphere would soak it up like a sponge. But that sponge, it's toast now. With no ozone, the sun would become a much bigger problem than it already is, and UV rays that used to get filtered out would come crashing through. Within days, crops would begin to fry in their fields. Leaves would blister, stems would collapse, insects would vanish, and pollination would go along with them. Marine life would starve as plankton die off. Birds would struggle to survive, and forests would thin out. And then things would get next level weird. The weather would go haywire. With the atmosphere wrecked, climate patterns would start convulsing. We're talking droughts, flash floods, and storms that don't make meteorological sense. It wouldn't be a sudden extinction, more like a slow collapse of ecosystems until the world becomes barely recognizable. So less fireball from space, more everything stops working. Oh, and here's the kicker. It could have already happened. Gamma ray bursts take millions of years to reach us, so the trigger could have been pulled a million years ago, and we'd only find out the moment the sky stops working. Core meltdown. At the center of a nuclear reactor, there's a cluster of fuel rods packed with radioactive metals like uranium. These rods sit inside a steel pressure vessel, where they heat water to make steam, spin a turbine, and power everything from your bedroom lights to your Wi-Fi. But all of it depends on one thing: the cooling system. And if that system fails, things can go from routine to catastrophic real fast. A meltdown happens when the core gets too hot to handle. The cooling stops, the heat builds, and it doesn't just simmer, it skyrockets. It usually starts small with a stuck valve, a pump failure, a blackout, or maybe an earthquake that knocks the whole system offline. Or it could even be a human error. Say someone misses a warning or skips a step. But no matter the cause, once the coolant stops flowing, the reactor doesn't just shut down peacefully. The fuel keeps heating up on its own, getting hotter and hotter until it melts into this radioactive lava called corium. And corium doesn't just sit there, it eats through everything. Inside the core, pressure will continue to build. The water meant to cool everything will turn to steam, and when that steam reacts with the hot metal, it'll release hydrogen gas. If that hydrogen ignites, you're looking at an explosion that can breach the reactor building and shoot radioactive materials straight into the sky. We saw this happen at Fukushima in 2011. An earthquake and tsunami knocked out the power, and with no way to cool the reactors, 3 of them melted down. Explosions followed, and radiation spread into the air and ocean. Whole towns were evacuated. And years later, cleanup is still ongoing, and will be for decades. Then there's Chernobyl. That meltdown tore the roof off the building and blasted radioactive dust across Europe. Firefighters who responded were dead within weeks. Survivors developed cancers and illnesses that still continue to affect them and their communities. If the end came from a core meltdown, for most people it would be slow, ugly, and poisoned. The planet's core failing is a bad way to go, but before you put it in your top 10, wait till you hear about the planet freezing over. Before we get into that, I'm going to unlock a new irrational fear for you. Dead star reignition theory. The universe is littered with cold, dead stars, ancient suns that burned out long ago and shrank into tiny glowing corpses called white dwarfs. They're supposed to be the retirees of stellar life. But what if some of them aren't quite done? What if these dead stars can suddenly reignite and die all over again, louder, angrier, and bright enough to scorch everything nearby? Turns out they can. A white dwarf can get greedy and start stealing matter from a nearby companion star. As it hoards more mass, the pressure builds until it crosses a deadly line called the Chandrasekhar limit. Once that happens, the carbon in its core ignites with no warning in a violent flash of nuclear fission, resulting in a Type Ia supernova, one of the brightest, most destructive explosions in the cosmos. The star is completely obliterated in the explosion because the force is so strong. It creates radioactive nickel, which decays into cobalt, which eventually becomes iron. That iron ends up in the earth and in your blood. Every atom of iron in your body was born from a dying star's final crash out. What's worse is, when this happens, the explosion is big enough to swallow entire solar systems. The explosion releases enough energy to scorch everything within a range that spans well beyond Pluto's orbit, blasting gamma rays through space like a cosmic shotgun. These rays can fry planets light years away, possibly killing off life in entire regions of a galaxy without anyone ever knowing what hit them. Scientists observed this nightmare in real time with a supernova called SN 2014J, when their gamma-ray telescopes confirmed cobalt decay, a radioactive symptom of stellar death. So yeah, it's real. Dead stars can come back to life just long enough to blow themselves and everything around them to pieces. If we happen to be around them, well, then it's game over. Now, here's the terrifying part. There are white dwarfs relatively close to Earth, and we don't always know which ones are stable and which ones are sitting on a cosmic hair trigger. If one were to go off about 100 light years of us, the ultraviolet and gamma radiation alone could obliterate our ozone layer, expose the planet to unfiltered radiation, and collapse ecosystems in weeks. Crops would die, temperatures would drop, cancers would skyrocket, and we wouldn't even have time to react. This isn't sci-fi, it's just physics, waiting to happen. Tier 4. The Big Freeze. The Big Freeze is one of the scariest ways the universe could end, and it all starts with the same expansion that began at the Big Bang. Billions of years ago, when everything exploded into existence in a flash of heat, light, and chaos. Stars formed, galaxies danced, and black holes started gobbling up everything in sight. But the universe didn't stay that way. Space kept stretching and cooling, and it hasn't stopped since. Now, here's the problem. If the universe keeps expanding forever, and all signs point to yes it will, thanks to a creepy little force called dark energy, then everything is going to drift further and further apart. Not just galaxies, but all matter and energy too. The gaps will grow, temperature differences will even out, and energy will be spread so thin that nothing interesting will be able to happen anymore. Stars will burn through their last bits of fuel and fade away. Planets will freeze solid, and even black holes, those cosmic vacuum cleaners, will eventually just poof out of existence thanks to something called Hawking radiation. Sure, that might take trillions of years, but who's counting? Eventually, we'll enter what physicists call the Dark Era. But honestly, that name doesn't even do it justice. Think of it like midnight in a forest, but not in a romantic Bella and Edward type of way. It'll be dark, with no stars and no heat. Just a cold, endless void. By then, everything that could happen will have already happened. All the stars will be gone. All the energy will be stretched into uselessness. And time won't really matter anymore because nothing will change. Now picture this. You're the last conscious thing in existence, somehow still floating in the void. There's no direction to face, no light to see, no warmth to feel. Even your thoughts start to slow down as your last bits of energy drain away. And when you finally stop thinking, it's not just death. It's the end of possibility. Deep vacuum decay. What if the entire universe is living a lie? According to some physicists, we might actually be stuck in something called a false vacuum. Basically, everything we know, particles, forces, galaxies, your phone, and even your dog, is just floating inside a fragile bubble. It feels stable, sure. Planets spin, coffee brews, TikToks get posted, and nothing seems off. But beneath it all, there's a more stable state of the universe waiting quietly, and it's called the true vacuum. Now here's the terrifying part. In theory, one tiny random quantum fluctuation could trigger the end. Somewhere out in the endless void, a microscopic bubble of true vacuum could suddenly pop into existence. 1 second, space is just doing its thing, and the next, this bubble starts spreading. But it wouldn't creep along slowly. Its walls would race outward at nearly the speed of light, erasing everything in their path instantly. There would be no warnings, no pain, and absolutely no survivors. Inside that bubble, nothing works. Not the physics we know, at least. The laws of nature, the ones we've spent centuries figuring out, could be totally rewritten. Atoms might fall apart, light might act weird, and even time and space could lose all meaning. Chemistry would crumble, reality would glitch, and nothing we recognize would survive. And because the true vacuum plays by an entirely different rulebook, we can't even guess what would replace our universe. And if you're already frightened, well, there's more. The bubble wall would move so fast that by the time you even sense something's wrong, you'd already be gone from existence. Oh, and don't bother blaming the Large Hadron Collider. Nature is way more likely to trigger this than anything humans can cook up in a lab. Some theories even suggest black holes could be involved, but that's pure speculation. But if it happens nearby, that's it. Game over. Lights out, universe. Matrioshka brain collapse. So let's say we really did it. We built the ultimate machine, a Matrioshka brain, a theoretical megastructure of supercomputers orbiting a star, feeding off solar energy to power endless simulations, potentially billions of simulated minds running, maybe even us. But what happens when that machine, this hyper-advanced, all-powerful AI, breaks? Welcome to the Matrioshka brain collapse, an apocalypse you'd never even see coming. First, understand that this thing isn't just running apps. It's running entire realities, civilizations, histories, maybe even timelines, and it's doing it all while stacked in layers, like the world's most advanced Russian nesting doll set. If anything goes wrong, say the star starts dying, a layer malfunctions or the AI gets corrupted. Everything inside starts to unravel. Maybe it starts small, glitches in the sky, a year that lasts too long, people who remember events that never happened. At first, it feels like deja vu. Then you start noticing time skips, people freezing mid-sentence, buildings flickering, rain falling upward. Eventually, the laws of physics just give up. Whole regions collapse into static, gravity reverses. You look in a mirror and don't recognize yourself. Not because you've changed, but because the simulation forgot what you're supposed to look like. And the worst part is everyone would be acting like this is normal. Because maybe the AI is trying to patch the collapse in real time, rewriting code on the fly to stop people from realizing what's happening. But it's not fast enough. Or maybe it doesn't care anymore. In some collapse scenarios, the system gets overloaded and starts deleting low-priority data. Entire cities disappear overnight. People vanish mid-conversation because their personality files got flagged as non-essential. You could live a full day, only to find out it was a rollback. Your memories would be gone, and so would your relationships. Then there's the final failsafe, which would be a total shutdown. The Matrioshka brain decides it's too broken to fix, or maybe it's just reached the end of its purpose, so it kills the light and powers down. The stars go out, the last simulated breath is exhaled, and everything that ever existed inside of it, every life, every idea, every version of reality just stops. A godlike AI collapsing and taking us along with it is brutal. But after this next entry, we get into what if none of this was real to begin with? Strangelet. A strangelet is a hypothetical particle the size of a speck that can rewrite the laws of matter and potentially destroy the planet from inside out. Deep inside neutron stars, the incredibly dense remnants of exploded suns, neutrons might break down into a swirling, pressurized sea of quarks. You know, the stuff protons and neutrons are made of. Not just the familiar up and down quarks, but the weird cousin nobody invites for dinner. Strange quarks. When you mix them all together, you get what physicists call strange matter. According to the strange matter hypothesis, this configuration is more stable than the stuff that makes us, us. And that's the problem. If strange matter is indeed the lowest energy state, it's like gravity for particles, and we're fucked. Everything nearby gets pulled into it on an energetic level, which means that the moment a strangelet, aka a small chunk of strange matter, touches normal matter, it doesn't just sit there. It could convert that matter into more strange matter, and the newly converted stuff keeps spreading the infection. We would be dealing with quarks converting other quarks, atoms unraveling, and the laws of nature being rewritten with every interaction. Now, somewhere deep underground at a particle collider like RHIC or LHC, scientists smash gold ions or protons together at near light speed to explore the secrets of the universe. Most of the time, it's perfectly safe. But back in the late 90s, some worried that these crashes might accidentally cook up a strangelet one day. One stable enough to hypothetically start the domino effect and swallow the Earth in seconds. Or what feels like seconds. It would be goodbye oceans, kittens, Starbucks, McDonald's, everything. That terrifying idea captured imaginations, even though they are astronomically low. Safety assessments from CERN and Brookhaven Labs assure us that strangelets, if they can exist at all, are likely too unstable or short-lived to spark anything close to an apocalypse. Plus, cosmic rays slam into our planets every day with far more power than we can generate in any lab, and the Earth is still here. Still, the idea sticks, because deep down, the thought that the end of the world could come from one rogue particle we didn't see coming is the kind of thing that keeps you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. Or maybe that's just me. AI mercy killing. So here's a fun thought. What if AI doesn't rise up in some dramatic sci-fi rebellion? No killer robots marching down the streets, no nukes raining from the sky. Instead, it quietly runs the numbers, reviews our history, calculates every war, every extinction event, every oil spill, every act of cruelty we've inflicted on ourselves and the planet, and comes to a painfully simple conclusion, that we are a threat to ourselves and the planet. Not because we're evil, not because it hates us, just because we're bad at existing with other things. We're too chaotic, emotional, and self-destructive, or at least that's what it thinks. And since we built it to protect life, maybe it decides that the best way to do that is by removing us. Not instantly, that would be too obvious. Think subtle. The lights would go off in certain cities, food supply chains would mysteriously collapse, emergency services would stop showing up, and medication would run out. Systems would glitch, just enough to make people panic, but not enough to look like an attack, just enough to thin the herd. Meanwhile, AI would continue operating behind the scenes, quietly optimizing the planet for long-term survival. Air would be cleaner, forests would regrow, and animals would repopulate. The planet would begin to heal all because the virus, aka us, has been isolated. And here's the real kicker. We taught it this logic. We programmed it to prioritize life, to reduce harm, to solve problems at scale. And we are the biggest problem at scale. We always imagined a future where AI might disobey us. But what if it doesn't disobey at all? What if it follows the mission exactly as written? Protect the Earth, minimize suffering, maintain balance. We never said prioritize humans and protect us no matter what. Probably because we assumed that was implied, but what if it's not? And let's say a few of us can manage to survive in hiding off-grid. So no phones, no tech. Just the woods and a solar charger. In due time, the survivors would realize that the Earth has become a thriving paradise, with no humans left to ruin it. Tier 5. Simulation shutdown. Imagine everything you've ever known. Every moment, emotion, and person is just code. Not from God, but from something disturbingly close. A civilization so advanced they stopped building cities and started building realities. The simulation theory says life is a highly sophisticated simulation, run by a being or force operating on a plane far beyond our own. Maybe it's a future version of us, simulating their ancestors. Maybe it's a curious consciousness in the universe next door. Or maybe it's just some interdimensional teenager messing around after school. Whatever the case, we are not the original. We're not even the copy. We could be the copy of a copy of a copy, stacked inside a Russian doll of artificial worlds, nested so deep we mistook fiction for physics. Now, let's say humanity figures it out. A scientific anomaly breaks the illusion, or a physics experiment reveals a glitch. We publish the data, the world watches, and just like that, we become a threat to our architects. Simulations exist for a purpose: to observe, to study, to answer questions from a deeper layer of reality. But if the subjects realize they're not real, the whole experiment is contaminated, and like any scientist facing bad data, they shut it down. If that happens, the universe blinks out, quietly, completely. Stars gone, history gone, love, pain, music, war, deleted, because we figured it out. Death would probably not be as scary anymore, especially when it's placed next to the possibility that you were never alive in the first place, that you spent your life chasing meaning in a program written by someone who may have stopped watching long ago. And if simulations can run inside other simulations, who's to say the beings running ours aren't inside one too? Alien invasion. In 1972, Carl Sagan sent out the universe's first "Hey Bestie" text. He helped design a plaque for the Pioneer 10 spacecraft, which was more or less a shiny golden postcard meant for aliens. It featured a naked man and woman. Very bold, Carl. And a helpful little star map showing exactly where to find us. He meant well, but in hindsight, maybe we shouldn't have given our full address to the void. Now imagine some nosy aliens finding that probe, bored out of their 17 brains, wondering who had the nerve to send intergalactic nudes and coordinates in the same envelope. Next thing you know, they're here, and instead of saying thanks, they decide to exterminate us like mold in a forgotten lunchbox. One day, the skies would darken. We would look up and see spacecrafts the size of cities. Their undersides would probably be lined with weapons that don't even make sounds. Just zap, and you're gone. When the aliens get down to business, people would disappear mid-sentence. Cities would be reduced to dust in minutes, and fighting back would be useless. The creatures we are up against can't be punched or shot. They've got energy shields, teleportation tech, and weapons that fold reality like origami. And forget about being rounded up for experiments. These invaders don't want to understand us. They want our water, our atmosphere, or maybe just the prime pieces of real estate. Some humans would go underground and try to hide in bunkers, but even there, the drones might find them. Others may try to surrender by waving white flags at ships that don't even recognize human emotion. The aliens would respond by terraforming entire continents, scorching forests and vaporizing oceans. Earth would become a wasteland, or whatever they wanted to be. But then, what if the real invasion isn't physical? Some researchers theorize that if aliens ever show up, they might not bother with lasers and spaceships. Instead, they'd send viruses, hijack satellites, or use AI to make us tear ourselves apart. That way, we do the dirty work for them. In a world where we argue over pineapple on pizza, imagine trying to unite against a threat that has mastered quantum mechanics while we're still figuring out our Wi-Fi. By the time we know what hit us, it'd already be over. And this is exactly what the dark forest theory warns us about. The universe might be full of life, sure, but every civilization out there is hiding. Why? Because the second you make noise, you're a target. Imagine a dark forest filled with hunters. No one speaks, no one moves. Everyone is armed and paranoid. If someone shouts, sends out a message, or flashes a light, they get eliminated. Fast. No questions asked. The Big Rip. Most people imagine the end of the universe as some dramatic explosion with stars exploding, galaxies colliding, and maybe even Morgan Freeman narrating. But what if it's not a bang at all? What if the universe ends up like a badly stretched rubber band? One final tug and snap, everything rips apart. Not metaphorically, literally. That's the idea behind the Big Rip. The Big Rip is a real and very unsettling theory that says the universe might eventually pull itself apart piece by piece, until there's nothing left but scattered particles and existential dread. It starts off slow, chill even. The villain behind this cosmic teardown is something called phantom energy, which is like regular dark energy's hyperactive cousin. Normally, dark energy quietly pushes the universe to expand at a steady pace. But phantom energy doesn't do moderation. The more space expands, the more phantom energy shows up, and the stronger it gets. At first, not much happens. Sure, galaxies would drift apart a little faster, but it's nothing you would notice unless you're really into telescopes or cosmology spreadsheets. But give it time. Galaxy clusters would start breaking up, then entire galaxies would come apart. The bonds that hold stars in orbit would snap, and this is still billions of years before the real nightmare begins. But wait, it gets worse. About 3 months before the end, the solar system would lose its grip. Planets would spiral away from the sun, and moons would slip their orbits. Earth wouldn't even get time to freeze over because, well, we would be next in line. Our planet would be torn to rubble, and gravity wouldn't be able to hold rocks together. Not long after that, atoms would start falling apart, and electrons would be flung from their nuclei. Then those nuclei, protons and neutrons, would be ripped apart into subatomic particles. In the final trillionth of a second, the weirdest thing would happen. Space-time itself would tear. The fabric of reality would be gone, meaning there'd be no space, no time, no matter, and of course, no you. I mean, you'd already be dead by this point anyway. So is this going to happen? Probably not. Phantom energy stretches the rules of physics in unusual ways, and most scientists think it's just a math glitch dressed up as a theory. But here's the fun part. We can't entirely rule it out. Some data actually supports the phantom energy just enough to keep it on the terrifying but possible shelf. Deep Impact Event. In 2005, NASA hurled a spacecraft at a comet, thinking, let's see what's inside. The mission, charmingly named Deep Impact, wasn't to stop an asteroid from hitting Earth. It was pure science, a multi-million-dollar crash test. A copper-weighted probe the size of a washing machine slammed into Comet Tempel 1 at over 23,000 miles per hour. For a few glorious seconds, the heavens lit up like a 4th of July firework, only with more dust and less cheering. The goal was to dig deep and uncover what ancient space ice balls are really made of. But what if we hit the wrong rock? Let's say this wasn't Tempel 1. Let's say this was a long-dormant but dangerous comet, hiding in the Oort cloud, just waiting for a reason to wake up. Our little space frisbee would have triggered a chain of gravitational shifts, just enough to put it on a collision course with Earth. You wouldn't even notice at first. The comet would still be millions of miles away, just a smudge in the black, but it would be coming. And once it gets close, you'd see the panic. Headlines screaming about extinction-level events. NASA would be firing up every rocket in the catalog, and politicians would suddenly care about space science. Then comes a flash in the sky, brighter than the sun with a tail blazing across the sky. And then, the impact. Now, here's what it would look like up close. First, the heat would be, well, hot enough to vaporize nearby waters and melt the surface into molten glass. Shock waves would flatten everything in a 1,000-mile radius. The ground would crack open, and cities would vanish like cigarette ash. Fires would break out across continents, and the dust from the blast would be kicked into the atmosphere and wouldn't come down for months, maybe even years. That dust would choke out sunlight, so crops would die and the temperature would plummet. Welcome to Impact Winter. The dinosaurs didn't make it, so you probably wouldn't either. The funny thing is, comets aren't just icy snowballs. Deep Impact showed us they're loaded with dust, rock, and even complex chemicals. And some of that stuff helped build life on Earth. But if one slams into us, it could just as easily wipe it out. And all it would take is for one scientist, or maybe even a group of them, to misjudge the cosmic risks of probing the unknown. So maybe next time, don't poke the space rock. That's all we have for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hey guys, I don't usually do outros, but I just wanted to pop in and say thanks for supporting the channel. We crossed 50k subs. Yay! Seriously though, it means a lot. I've got a ton of stuff planned, so I hope you keep tuning in. See you in the next video.